It has been more than 4 decades since Natalie Wood's mysterious death shocked Hollywood. But today new details, new testimonies, and chilling contradictions have brought her case roaring back into the spotlight. And what investigators are saying now is darker than anything we've heard before. Natalie wasn't just a beloved actress. She was a symbol of Hollywood's golden age: glamour, vulnerability, and heartbreaking brilliance all wrapped into one. But behind the dazzling red carpets and unforgettable performances was a woman living with fear, secrets, and a marriage many insiders say was far more troubled than anyone knew at the time. On that November night in 1981, Natalie boarded her husband Robert Wagner's yacht for a weekend getaway trip that was supposed to be peaceful, intimate, and private. Instead, it turned into one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. The official explanation drowning never sat right with investigators, friends, or even her own family. Too many questions, too many conflicting stories, and too many details that simply did not add up. Now, after years of silence, new investigators, previously unheard witnesses, and modern forensic analysis have pieced together the most complete picture, yet of what really happened that night. And the truth isn't good. In fact, it changes everything for the first time. Experts claim they can finally explain the bruises on her body, the screams heard from the water, and why multiple accounts from that night contradict each other. This new understanding doesn't just reopen old wounds, it exposes something far more chilling. Before this story ends, you will see why authorities officially reclassified her death, why so many believe the case was mishandled from the beginning, and why those closest to Natalie insist she didn't simply fall into the water. She was running from something. Natalie Wood's rise to fame was nothing short of extraordinary, a journey that began when she was just a child and transformed her into one of Hollywood's most magnetic figures. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko, she grew up in a household where dreams were encouraged, but pressure was constant. Her mother, often described as controlling and determined, pushed Natalie into the spotlight before she could fully understand what that meant. By the age of 8, she had already become a recognizable face, and by her teenage years, she was one of the most sought-after young actresses in the industry. Off-screen, Natalie was known for her warmth, kindness, and deep emotional sensitivity. She had an uncanny ability to make people feel seen and heard, qualities that helped her connect with audiences and co-stars alike. But beneath that gentle exterior, friends say she carried a lifelong fear of deep water, a fear so intense that she avoided even the idea of being near dark, open seas. What makes that detail even more unnerving is that her eventual death occurred on the water she feared most. By the time she reached adulthood, Natalie had become a Hollywood icon. Films like Rebel Without a Cause, Splendor in the Grass, and West Side Story cemented her legacy. But fame brought a different kind of pressure. She struggled with the expectations placed upon her, everything from staying picture perfect to maintaining a controlled public image. Hollywood loved her, but Hollywood also demanded more than most people could endure. It was during this stage of her life that Natalie fell deeply in love with Robert Wagner, a rising star who quickly became her partner both on and off screen. Their romance was intense, passionate, and dramatic, just like a Hollywood script. At first, they seemed like the perfect match, glamorous, adored, and constantly in the headlines. But behind the magazine covers and smiling photographs, their relationship was far more complicated. Friends close to the couple later revealed that arguments were common, often sparked by jealousy, insecurity, and the pressures of dual celebrity careers. Natalie, who had always longed for emotional stability, found herself torn between her love for Wagner and her need for safety, both emotionally and physically. Their first marriage ended in divorce, but the couple reunited years later, insisting they had matured and learned from the past. Still, those who knew them well weren't convinced that everything had truly changed. Even as she returned to Wagner, Natalie's fear of water remained strong. She confided in friends that she would avoid swimming at night and felt uneasy whenever she was near deep, dark waves. Yet she agreed to spend Thanksgiving weekend aboard the yacht Splendor, a decision that continues to raise questions to this day. As the night of November 28, 1981, approached, Natalie felt a familiar mix of excitement and anxiety. She was working on new film projects, dealing with the pressures of fame once again, and juggling the intense dynamics of her marriage. But she also looked forward to the time away, hoping it might bring some peace or clarity. Unfortunately, what was meant to be a quiet escape soon spiraled into something far darker. Multiple people who knew Natalie in her final months described her as thoughtful, reflective, and increasingly aware of the fragility of her life. She was starting to reconsider the choices she had made both professionally and personally. What she didn't know was that the trip she agreed to take would become the center of one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. And as the yacht left the harbor that weekend, Natalie Wood unknowingly stepped into the final chapter of her extraordinary life. A chapter filled with contradictions, unanswered questions, and a truth that investigators are still trying to piece together even decades later. The atmosphere aboard the yacht Splendor that fateful weekend was far from calm. Despite the smiling photos often associated with Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner, along with them was actor Christopher Walken, Natalie's co-star in her latest film project. Their professional relationship had sparked rumors in Hollywood whispers that Natalie and Walken had grown unusually close while filming. Though Natalie denied anything inappropriate, the tension this created with Wagner was undeniable. From the moment the yacht left the harbor, small signs hinted that the trip might not unfold peacefully. Crew members later recalled that Wagner appeared on edge while Natalie seemed unusually quiet, as though carrying the weight of something unspoken. Walken, for his part, maintained a calm and polite demeanor, but even he couldn't ignore the subtle strain between the couple. As evening settled in, the group gathered for dinner on the yacht. Wine flowed freely, and the conversation, at first casual, slowly grew more pointed. Witnesses would later describe how the tone of the night shifted dramatically. What began as playful teasing soon turned into sharp remarks, especially from Wagner, who seemed increasingly irritated by the easy rapport between Natalie and Walken. At one point, the atmosphere grew so uncomfortable that even the captain sensed rising tension. After dinner, the group attempted to relax in the cabin area, but the tension only thickened. Walken and Natalie discussed their ongoing film, talking about artistic choices, character motivations, and the industry's future. Wagner, already simmering with jealousy, eventually snapped, confronting Walken in a heated exchange. The argument, fueled by alcohol and insecurity, grew so intense that the captain stepped away, giving the trio space to cool down. Natalie, uncomfortable and visibly shaken, retreated to her room. Those who later pieced together the timeline believe she wanted to avoid further conflict, hoping that giving Wagner and Walken space would de-escalate the situation. But her departure didn't ease the tension. Wagner reportedly continued the argument with Walken, voices rising, footsteps echoing through the yacht's tight corridors. What happened next remains one of the most disputed elements of the entire tragedy. Different accounts place Natalie in different areas of the yacht in the minutes before she disappeared. Some believe she attempted to untie a small dinghy that had been rubbing loudly against the yacht, creating a noise she disliked. Others think she stepped outside simply to get fresh air and escape the growing chaos inside. The Splendor rocked gently in the dark water, surrounded by an eerie silence broken only by the sound of waves. Natalie, who had always been afraid of deep water, would never have wandered far without reason. That single fact has become one of the strongest arguments of those who question the official explanation of what happened next. At some point between the escalating argument and the early hours of the morning, Natalie was no longer aboard the yacht. No one noticed her absence immediately. By the time Wagner realized she was missing, precious moments had already slipped away, moments that could have made the difference between life and death. When the crew finally began searching, confusion and fear swept through the yacht. They called out her name, scanned the dark waves, and checked every corner of the vessel. But Natalie was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until later that the small, inflatable dinghy, the Valiant, was discovered floating not far from the yacht. Its engine was off, and its interior showed no clear signs of struggle. But its presence only deepened the mystery. Why would Natalie, someone terrified of water, leave the comfort of the yacht at night? Why would she be alone? And why was no one aware of her disappearance until so much time had passed? These haunting questions marked the beginning of a mystery that would follow Hollywood for decades. Investigators, journalists, and fans around the world were left wondering what really took place in those crucial moments, and why so many details seemed to contradict the official explanation. When Natalie Wood's body was found, floating near the Catalina coastline, the world entered a state of shock. She was only 43, an icon, a mother of 2 young daughters, and one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. The early morning discovery sent ripples of disbelief across the entertainment industry. The official report stated she had drowned accidentally, possibly while trying to secure the small dinghy that had been drifting nearby. But from the moment news broke, something about the explanation didn't sit right with anyone who knew her. Natalie's lifelong fear of dark, open water was well documented. Friends, directors, and even her own family confirmed that she would avoid boats whenever she could. Even stepping near the edge of a dock made her uneasy. So the idea that she willingly climbed down a slippery yacht ladder in the middle of the night alone, in the dark, with strong waves and fully dressed, didn't add up. Her sister, Lana Wood, would later say that Natalie would rather walk into fire than step into water at night. As investigators examined the scene, more inconsistencies surfaced. Natalie's jacket, the one she was reportedly wearing when she fell into the water, was heavy enough to drag down even a strong swimmer. Her shoes were still on, something rarely worn by someone trying to secure a dinghy or climb into one. Even more troubling were the bruises found on her arms and legs, marks that could be explained as injuries from the fall, but also aligned with signs of a struggle. Despite these questions, the case was quickly closed. Authorities ruled the death accidental, and the industry moved on, at least on the surface. But those closest to Natalie refused to accept the story as it was presented. Lana Wood, especially, dedicated years to gathering information, insisting that the truth had been buried under the weight of fame, influence, and fear. Over the next few decades, whispers about that night resurfaced again and again. Books were written, documentaries released, and interviews conducted with people who were there or connected to those who were. One of the most troubling revelations came from the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. For years he remained silent, but decades later he finally admitted he had been pressured into keeping certain details quiet. He confessed that the argument between Robert Wagner and Natalie had been far more intense than originally reported, and that Wagner delayed calling for help much longer than he publicly admitted. Davern claimed that he heard raised voices, furniture being moved, and what he described as a terrible fight. He also stated that when he suggested turning on the searchlights or calling the Coast Guard immediately, Wagner insisted they wait. This delay, in Davern's view, might have cost Natalie her life. His confession reopened the entire case, causing the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to reclassify her death from accidental to undetermined. Evidence that had once been overlooked was re-examined using new forensic techniques. Several witnesses who had been in the area that night came forward, reporting they heard a woman's voice crying out for help sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., a voice pleading, "Someone, help me." Some described the cries as panicked and desperate, echoing across the water. These accounts contradicted the timeline originally provided by those aboard the yacht. If Natalie had fallen earlier than Wagner said, why didn't anyone react sooner? And if someone heard screams, why had no one on the Splendor reported hearing them? As the investigation reopened, media coverage intensified, and the public's fascination with the tragedy grew even stronger. Every new detail fueled speculation. Was Natalie trying to flee an escalating argument? Did she slip accidentally during a moment of panic? Or was she pushed intentionally or unintentionally during a heated confrontation? While the reopened investigation brought renewed attention, it also reopened old wounds for her family. Her daughters faced the painful reality of reliving their mother's final hours, while her sister continued her tireless effort to uncover the truth. Hollywood found itself torn between honoring Natalie's legacy and confronting the uncomfortable possibility that the real story behind her death had been hidden in plain sight for decades. By this point, the case had grown far too complicated to dismiss as mere speculation. Too many voices, too many inconsistencies, and too many unanswered questions remained. Something had happened that night, and the truth, long buried beneath decades of silence, was beginning to claw its way to the surface. In the years that followed, the mystery surrounding Natalie Wood's final night only deepened. As new testimonies, re-examined evidence, and shifting statements cast an increasingly troubling light on what might have happened aboard the Splendor. While the world mourned a beloved actress, investigators continued to untangle a story that seemed to grow darker with every new detail. What started as a tragic accident had now evolved into one of Hollywood's most unsettling unsolved stories, one that refused to rest. When the case was reopened, authorities made a significant move. They publicly identified Robert Wagner, Natalie's husband, as a person of interest. This revelation stunned the entertainment world. For decades, Wagner had maintained that Natalie's death was a heartbreaking accident, but investigators argued that his version of events contained inconsistencies that could no longer be ignored. Wagner declined to meet with detectives for follow-up interviews, creating even more scrutiny around his actions that night. One of the most contentious issues was the timeline. Wagner insisted he had last seen Natalie shortly before she supposedly went to bed, but several witnesses on nearby boats claimed they heard arguing coming from the Splendor closer to the time when Natalie would have gone missing. Their statements described a heated exchange, voices filled with anger and frustration, echoing across the dark water. These accounts painted a picture starkly different from the calm evening Wagner initially described. The bruises on Natalie's body, once explained away as the result of her fall into the water, also underwent new analysis. Medical experts suggested that the pattern and location of some marks were not typical of someone simply slipping and hitting the side of a boat. Instead, they were more consistent with someone being grabbed or restrained. While this didn't prove foul play, it raised serious questions about the moments leading up to her disappearance. The dinghy, the Valiant, also became a critical piece of the puzzle. Investigators questioned why the small boat had been found floating away from the yacht, with no clear signs of use. Its oars were still in their locked position, the engine was off, and there were no footprints indicating Natalie had stepped inside. The idea that she tried to secure it on her own made little sense, especially given her deep fear of the ocean at night. Meanwhile, Christopher Walken, the third person on the yacht, remained noticeably quiet about the incident for decades. When he finally addressed it publicly, his statements were brief and guarded. He maintained that whatever happened was an accident, but he avoided providing specific details about the argument earlier that evening. His silence only fueled speculation. Some believed Walken stayed quiet out of respect for the family. Others believed he was protecting himself or someone else from further scrutiny. Despite all of this, no charges were ever filed. The investigation reached a standstill, not because the mystery had been solved, but because the available evidence remained frustratingly incomplete. Much of what investigators needed was lost to time: the sounds in the dark, the panic on the waves, the silence aboard the yacht after the shouting had stopped. Without definitive proof, the case remained in limbo, suspended between suspicion and uncertainty. For Natalie Wood's family, especially her sister Lana, the lack of closure was devastating. She continued pushing for answers, insisting that justice had never been fully served. She spoke publicly, wrote books, and participated in documentaries, hoping that someone, somewhere, would come forward with the missing piece of information. Her dedication kept the case alive in the public eye, ensuring the world would not forget what happened or what still remained hidden. Today, the Natalie Wood mystery stands as a haunting reminder of how quickly truth can disappear in the darkness. Decades may have passed, but the questions remain just as sharp, just as painful, and just as unresolved. Why was Natalie alone that night? What really happened during those critical moments when voices were raised and tempers flared? And why did those closest to her give conflicting accounts of the events? What is certain is this: Natalie Wood's legacy lives on, not only through her unforgettable performances, but through the enduring determination to uncover the truth. Her story has become more than a Hollywood tragedy. It is a puzzle that still holds the world's attention, a heartbreaking mystery that, even after all these years, refuses to fade.